Hey guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to make my first ever scrapbooking layout. Now I am so excited to show you guys how I made this. So this is my process video. I'm starting off by stamping a wood grain texture onto my 8.5 by 11 size sheet of cardstock. Now this 6 by 8 clear set allows you to stamp a wood grain texture effect by layering several stamps. I'm stamping the first layer first in our crystal pewter dye ink. It's the lightest ink in our pewter collection gray inks. And as I stamp a little bit more heavily towards the bottom portion of my cardstock, I'm going to do some generation stamping as I move upwards to the top right corner. And as I get closer to the top, I tissue off both ends of the stamp after I inked it up so that I'm not left with such harsh edges for my stamped impressions. Then I'm going to take these other stamps that come in the set and I'm going to stamp them in our Smoky Quartz dye ink. These stamps will give my background a little bit more of a distressed look. So the Smoky Quartz is slightly darker than the crystal pewter. And this is how we'll layer the different stamps. So next I'm going to take this thinner cracked line, and this is just going to give more of a distressed effect. And I'm going to continue to stamp it onto my background, and I'm going to continue doing some generational stamping. And what generation stamping is, after you ink up the stamp the first time, you're going to stamp your cardstock, and then instead of re-inking it, you're going to continue to stamp it again without re-inking the stamp. And you get the first generation, second generation, etc., etc. Once I'm satisfied with my wood grain background, I'm going to stamp this large happy sentiment from our brushed happy set in our light onyx dye ink. And I'm using a mini Misti to help me stamp. Next, I kept the cardstock in place and I didn't move the stamp. I just inked up the bottom half of the large sentiment with some clear sticky embossing ink, re-stamped the happy impression, and then I just poured on a little bit of gold glitter embossing powder to that bottom portion of the sentiment. And then I hit the panel with my heat tool, melting that embossing powder. I call this technique the stardust effect because you kind of have this ombre stardust look going on, and it's perfect for applying to large sentiments. Next, I'm going to take the coordinating die, place it face down over my stamped sentiment, and then I'm going to tape it down with some purple thermoweb tape. I'm going to put the panel into my die cutting sandwich, run the sandwich through my die cutting machine, and after I lift away the die, I'm left with this beautiful ombre glitter happy word die cut. Next, I decided I wanted some layers behind my photo. So I chose some black cardstock and this geometric lattice die cut that I had lying around. So next I taped down the lattice die cut over my black card base just using some tape, and then I adhered my photo onto those layers, and I'm using our double-sided adhesive sheets which I cut into strips. Now this is really strong double-sided adhesive, and I need to use it for my photos because the photos have it there. It's like slippery behind the photo, and a regular tape runner just won't do. Now I'm going to start creating all of those extra elements and bits that I'm going to use to build up my scrapbooking layout. So here you see some petal cut peony die cuts on my table and this star die cut, which I actually don't end up using. These sentiments that I'm stamping in our Noir dye ink, these are from our basic labels, and I just chose the happy, amazing, and wonderful sentiments. After I stamped them on some white cardstock, I just fussy cut them out. Now, I did stamp them twice, but I only use one set. So after I fussy cut them, I set them aside, and now I'm just going to stamp a couple of panels of some of our beautiful butterflies. We have 3 beautiful butterfly sets, 1, 2, and 3, and I'm using all 3. I'm stamping a few panels of all 3 sets, and I'm making sure to stamp the butterflies in several sizes because I want to create a beautiful cascade of butterflies coming across my page, going from the bottom towards the top corner. And I want to make sure that I have enough butterflies to work with. So I am stamping some extra, but these can always be set aside for future projects. For my inking, I'm using our Caviar Hybrid ink, which is Copic friendly. I will be coloring in these butterflies with a series of yellow, orange, and red Copic markers. So I'm double stamping my butterflies to make sure I get a nice, clear, crisp impression. And I'm using my Misti to help me stamp. The reason why I chose the butterflies to go with today's layout is because uh, for the photo, I'm standing in front of a Stamp World sign. I mean, you don't see signs like this often when you go out in public. And since I own a stamp design shop, it was just so appropriate and I was so excited when I saw the sign. So it made me happy, and that is why I chose this sentiment. And that's why I also chose this butterfly theme, because when you see a cluster of butterflies, I mean, there's not a lot of things that are prettier than a cluster of butterflies. And the term that's used to refer to a cluster of these critters is a kaleidoscope. So I have chosen to create a kaleidoscope of butterflies for my scrapbooking layout. And in the end, I am so happy with the results, especially since this is my first layout. So after I finish stamping my butterflies, I'm going to start coloring them in with a combination of Copic markers. I'm using reds, oranges, and yellows. I made sure to list all of the markers that I use on screen as I use them. So as I'm coloring, I make sure to add the darker shades towards the inner corners of the wings, and as we get closer to the outer edges, I use the lighter colors. The thing that I realized about scrapbooking was that you use scraps to create your layouts. I sat here, using a lot of our products. We are a stamp company. So, I stamped a lot of the elements that I used for my layout as I sat here making this project, but I know that there are so many beautiful scrapbooking products out there. You have already made, manufactured die cuts, ephemera, stickers, etc. And I realize that there is a point to that because it makes the whole scrapbooking process go faster. I sat here and I think this layout took me about 2 hours to make, and that is a long time for a project. But I thoroughly enjoy the process. I really, really did, because I'm a card maker, I'm a stamper. I love coloring. So just sitting here and coloring, all the individual butterflies and stamping and just, using what I had in my stash to create this layout was very, very enjoyable for me. And it was very satisfying at the end when I saw the end result. And if you're a card maker and you want to get into scrapbooking and you don't know where to start, because honestly, that's how I started. I kind of sat there with a blank page and I didn't really know where to start. I just looked up a bunch of YouTube uh, videos, and I just watched a lot of videos to see what other people were doing. Um, and I just used what I had in my stash. Um, and also, over the past few years, I've been stamping for a few years now. I've generated a lot of scraps, a lot of, stamp die cuts that I've had leftovers over the years. And sorry, that's my dog in the background, and he's going a little crazy right now. But I have a lot of scraps, and I've actually have now found a purpose to using them. I mean, I was creating, a bunch of cards from my leftovers, and that was great, but I kind of wanted to try something different. I think one thing that I'm going to do is, in my free time, I might just start stamping and coloring some random stuff and kind of keeping them aside for future projects, because things like, butterflies or florals, this is something that you can pretty much use, in any universal scrapbooking layout. So to save time in the future, I think that's what I'm going to do. Just if I just feel like crafting, but I have no particular purpose or end goal in mind, and I just want to kind of stamp and color, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to create things for the purpose of scrapbooking future layouts. So once I finished coloring all of my butterflies, I die cut them using their coordinating dies. And then I finally taped or adhered down my photo onto my cardstock. And now I'm going to start arranging some of my petal cut peony die cuts and some of the butterflies. Here I'm kind of trying to figure out where I want to put my happy title or sentiment or whatever you call it. At this point, I knew I wanted the happy sentiment towards the bottom portion of my photo. So I wanted to create a cluster of florals where the happy could kind of rest upon. So I just start sticking down some of my peony petal die cuts. And I'm making sure to alternate between the white die cuts and the colored die cuts. So the white die cuts, well, all of these die cuts I kind of just had lying around and I'm finally just using them up. So the colored die cuts, one of them was die cut using red glitter paper. Another one was die cut using just red paper. So I had them lying around and I'm finally using them up. And I just thought they looked really, really great with this layout. So after I've put down my initial, I guess, cluster of peonies and some butterflies, I'm going to tape down that happy sentiment. And now I'm just going to start taping down my butterflies, but I'm making sure to only apply adhesive to the body of the butterflies because I want the wings to kind of come or lift off the paper for a little bit of dimension. So as I stick down the butterfly, I make sure to kind of bend the wings forward. So I chose a simple color palette for today's layout because as you can see from the photo, the Stamp World sign is a nice bright red and then the rest of the photo is pretty neutral, and that's why I chose to go with more of a gray tone neutral wood grain background, and that's why I also colored in the butterflies using a warm color palette, the red, yellows, and oranges. I guess maybe I could have thrown in a little bit of blue because I have a little bit of blue in my scarf, but I chose to go with this more simple color scheme for today's layout. And I also added a little bit of that gold glitter to the title because if you know me as a crafter, I always like to add a little bit of gilding, a little bit of gold or rose gold to my projects because I like that hint or element of metallic. I think it just kind of gives it a nice polished edge. So now I am just going to start adhering down my kaleidoscope of butterflies, and I'm making sure to space them out and alternate between sizes. So I don't want to put, two large butterflies right next to each other. I want to make sure that I have a nice variety of butterflies around each other, and that way it's going to draw the eye a little bit more to your project. And as you can see, I'm making sure that the butterflies are moving from the bottom left hand corner to the top right hand corner. And I'm just really loving all of the depth and dimension and movement in this project. At this point, I was satisfied with the amount of butterflies on my project, so I had some extra left over, but I just put them aside and they'll be used for a future project. Now I just die cut some additional petal cut peony die cuts and leaves and foliage from the same die collection, and I die cut them onto some regular white cardstocks. I have this additional red peony. This actually I found lying around and I just tucked it into the corner behind my photo. And now I'm just going to start taping down the extra white elements. And this is just going to give my layout a bit more of a more finished and fuller look because I thought that the top left area looked a little empty. If I could go back, I would stamp more of that wood grain background texture to the top left area. But at this point, I had so many things already down on my cardstock. I just decided to add the white die cut pieces. And these die cut pieces just really added some nice subtle texture, but it really gave it that fullness that I was looking for. Now, as you can see, there is a little bit more of empty space at the top portion of my layout, but I decided this is where I'm going to add my journaling. So I will be filling in that area. At the end, it's going to look more complete. So I'm just going to start tucking in the last bits and pieces. These are just some foliage clusters and some leaf die cuts, and I'm just adding them behind my butterflies, and I'm just tucking them in. And we are almost at the finish line. I just have to stamp this label stamp. This is from our Modern Labels stamp set. It's a 6x8 clear stamp set. And I'm stamping it in our, I think this is our Smoky Quartz Dye Ink. So after I stamped it onto some white cardstock, I just fussy cut the label out. There are coordinating dies, but I just thought it was easier to fussy cut it because it's a simple rectangle. After I wrote in some of my journaling, I stamped the date using this date stamp that I've had forever but never used. And my label with the journaling is complete. I adhered it onto my project and my layout is finished. So what do you guys think? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you want to see more of this kind of stuff? Let me know in the comments and I will take everything into consideration. So thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.